Well, what a wonderful crowd of many of you, Miranda's wonderful friends. Wink, I should say. We're going to talk about Wink because that was the name she got when she was tiny, and it was much easier for tiny mouths and minds to call her Wink, I believe.
Correct.
I can't tell you how happy I am that she's flown from Vermont to give us this very, very special evening. She's one of my oldest friends, I think 45 or 50 years. We've been involved with many other potters and their lives, and she will reveal all. But I couldn't be more thrilled or impossible to be more delighted that she is here with us tonight. It's a huge effort for her, and it's in aid of the foundation, and she's supporting that very, very solidly. So I hope you will like what we're doing and feel free to contribute whenever you want. Some of you have already, but it all helps the wheels to turn around. So enjoy it and interrupt if you have a difficult problem wherever you are. I hope you won't. And over to Wink.
Thank you, Joanna. So I've known Joanna since I was 19, and she was terrifying. She was like my older sister. And we were one of the few females that actually got to work with some of these incredible potters. And Joanna, myself, and two other women. Otherwise, it was a male world. And Joanna, I just thank you so much for having me. And when she said, "Oh, will you give a talk?" I said, of course, because I'm coming to London all the time. So if ever you want to see me again, I'll be here. So I'm going to be a little bit unusual, and drawing calms my nerves. So I'm going to start with a drawing, okay? I've got my brushes, and thank you all for coming. It's just wonderful that you're here. Okay, so I'm going to draw a circle, and that's our sun, okay? And there's another circle, and that's our earth. And another circle, and that's our moon, right? Now the earth is spinning all the time. And if you're the sun, and that's the earth, it is spinning anti-clockwise. So here is your dawn, and here is your sunrise. And then you have day and night. So this is day, and then so you have a positive and a negative. And what this talk is all about is moving forward. We're always moving forward. This is all moving forward. We're constantly going forward. And life, I believe, is like a river. And we have the earth beneath us. And we have the sky above us. Sorry, getting a bit wobbly towards the end. And from our moment of birth, we're still heading in this direction. And I'm going to say that A. So we're always moving forward. And I'm going to make this A too. Because when you're a pot and you're spinning, if that's A and you go all the way around, you're coming back to the beginning again. So you're beginning and then ending in the same place. And I always think that's rather nice to think of our lives like that. So when we talk about moments, we're forming circles as we're moving forward. And as we're moving forward, little things start happening. We might suddenly see little things along the way. And we just take a little note of them as we're going along. And then we have these roadways now that we're walking and moving along, and we tend to embellish them. as we go along. And we all have our own style of embellishment. We're doing different things. We're moving along. I don't want to waste your time, but we have our positives and our negatives. This is where a brush is wonderful. So what I'm doing is I'm going into all the negative spaces. Sorry, I screwed up there. We're almost there. And do you see the pattern beginning to emerge? And this pattern is called the scroll of life. And it's been around since 560 BC Greece, and it's a pattern I use a lot, and it's all about, it's become a mandala now, it's all about moving forward but reflecting backwards, but you're always moving forward and reflecting backwards, and little key things are happening along the way. So that's what my talk's about. It's all about movement. And when people think about pots, they think of them as sedentary things. They're not. They're on the move. They're beyond us, even after we're dead. They're going to keep moving. They're going to have their own adventures. And people are using them constantly in the kitchen. They're looking inside of them. They're turning them upside down. They're moving all around them. Very rarely is it a flat plane. And I love that about pots, because it's spinning. They're spinning. And that's just how I see things. So I'm going to start the slideshow. It's going to go clickety-click. I'm 66, so there's a lot to get through. And just bear with me. And here we go. So strap on, because it's a bit of a wild ride. And this is a piece that just came out of the kiln probably 2 weeks ago. It's a backsplash for an enormous kitchen. It's very big. Anyway, now this incredible vivacious pair are my parents in the 1950s. And they are setting out on one of the great journeys of their life. They were moving from London to America. They were going to Boston, and my father was enrolled in the Harvard Business School, and my mother was a poet, fresh from Oxford. And she was just so brave at that time. And they bought this Georgian house on the side of the Hudson after he came out of business school in New York City. Just outside of New York City. Now, his father was one of the first Buddhists out of London, and lived in Japan, and actually went into the temple and came out as a Shinto monk. He also came out after that. My grandmother said, forget it, I'm going to stay in London. So she also collected an enormous amount of Japanese treasures, which we were surrounded with as children. And my mother's father designed the whole of the London Ritz. And when I say the whole of the London Ritz, it was one of the first steel frame buildings in London. And he designed it right down to the doorknobs. So when you go there, he did the RAC Club, he did number 1 Aldwych, he did all the lights on Piccadilly. And this is my grandfather. This isn't my great-grandfather, it's my grandfather. And he was a remarkable man. So my mother grew up always at the Ritz. And then she married this fellow, my father from Blakeney area, and he was traveling. He'd just come from Shanghai and fell in love with her, and off they went. And so here he is. He came out of the Harvard Business School as Diane Draper, if you know who that is. He was somebody who was going to take over the world with advertising, and he was given one of the accounts from McCann Erickson was Esso and Coca-Cola, and we were all four of us suddenly lifted out of New York and taken to Italy for the next 3 years. He got fired for trying to get the Pope to sell soap, and that's another story. He was far too creative a person, but my brothers and sister, they went to the American school, but I was too young, and I was sent to an Italian school. And when the ambassador of America came to the school, I was given my mother's necklace and this lovely little velvet dress, and I was presented with a thing of flowers that I had to give to this ambassador's wife. And she was the most glamorous lady I think I've ever seen. And ever since that moment when grown-ups said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" I said, "A diplomat." So here we are in Switzerland. Sorry. And then my mum got ill in Italy, and she needed to go on a drug called lithium. And so we moved back to the States, and they had this farmhouse in Maine. And my mum, being my mum, she was such an activist and things, but she was determined to find out more about her illness. So we started rock hunting in the woods in Maine. It has one of the greatest mineral deposits outside of Brazil. And I learned finding micas, quartz, lepidolites, lithium-based minerals. Meanwhile, my father was in charge of the Pepsi account now, because he switched from Coca-Cola to Pepsi because he was fired from McCann Erickson. So he went to Japan, and they started this pavilion with all his friends, Warhol, Rauschenberg, and Oldenburg, who were his friends in New York, and they created this Buckminster Fuller Dome, and he was so over budget, there were all these cracks and things, so they decided to find a young fog artist to coat it so you couldn't see the cracks and all the mistakes. And that fog artist, the one who just did the big installation at the Tate Modern, is the same woman from Japan as my father found. And these funny schmoos was kinetic sculpture, and they moved all around the courtyard. These people were way ahead of their time. And they believed that art should be used, and art should be in every single home. And my father was, yeah. So he created these mini schmoos that walked around people's dining room tables as they ate their dinners. And we still have this one here. But the other thing they did, and my father invested a lot of money into this, is they doodled on a napkin these little images. And this is Andy Warhol with his rude thing here. And then there's Klaus Oldenburg with the geometric mouse, and then Rauschenberg is here, and there are Frosty Myers, there are other people. They had it reduced down to a tiny titanium chip, and they had it on the leg of the Apollo 12, and it went up to the Earth, and the LEM is still up there. So there is art on the moon. You must know that, and you can Google it, and you'll see the whole thing about the Moon Museum. But they were bold, and they were incredibly ahead of their time. Again, they started the Pepsi revolution, where there were all those pop bands and all that kind of thing. And my father invested all that money, and NASA shut it all down. They didn't want people to start putting Coke cans on the moon. So my dad, again, got fired. He had to get another job with STP, the Racer's Edge. And I don't know if you remember all those stickers with STP on them. We were all trading them at school. And suddenly we're off to Sydney, Australia. He was going to be in charge of all the Far East Division. And as I grew up, I became a surf chick. And we would go up and down the coast. Now, my father also loved fishing. And I became, most of my time was spent surfing and fishing. This was us in Tasmania down. But my mother was such an activist, and as soon as she arrived, the ladies called her up to do lunch. She said, "I don't do lunch, but I am going to help the Aboriginal Australian." So she became such an activist, she would lay in front of bulldozers on beaches and stopped them from mining zirconium. And she got really cross with me because I was too busy studying for exams. I should have been out there with her. But she was a remarkable lady, and what I learned about the Aboriginal art is they knew the animal so well inside and out that they painted the inside of the animal as well as the outside. Now, at the age of 16, Ross McBride, my first teacher, he created a pottery in the art department, and all the students had to make pots because he believed that it was science, history, art, and a bit of business as well. And he learned that if we made pots, he could sell them for charity. And so as I was learning and thinking, it was like, oh, I could do this. I could do this for the rest of my life. This is really amazing. So we converted the back shed into a little mini pottery. And whilst my friends were all surfing, I started making pots. And these are my terrible, but I'm so proud of them. These are my first pots. And then my father decided that I should become a Japanese interpreter. So he had me learning kana, calligraphy and all sorts of things in the school. We were offered Japanese as a subject as well as Indonesian, but I chose Japanese and we were taught to do the Japanese calligraphy. So that's ka, the symbol meaning question. And I don't know why I was so philosophical then to do that. But then this is my first bamboo. And so once a year, Ross McBride plucked one of the students to go to his night classes. And I, luckily, was one of them. And these three men were all professionals, but they were very interested in Eastern philosophy. So that as potters, whilst they were learning, they would read out of their books about these giants of pottery. There was Suetsu Yanagi, who was the great philosopher of Japan, and he pretty much gave the identity back to Japan by translating into English their ideas of beauty. And again, Zen Buddhism, Shintoism, which you believe that there is life in inanimate objects. Bernard Leach, who was from here, he went to the Slade, and then he went out to Japan and got obsessed by pottery. And then Shoji Hamada, who looks very much like a traditional potter, but he actually went to the Tokyo University and studied a lot of chemistry and things like that. And then there was this incredible man, Michael Cardew, who worked with those gentlemen, but he went out to Africa. They were really working with Korea and Japan and China, but mostly Korea and Japan, whereas Michael went to Africa. And one just read so much about these incredible people. And as I was learning about the pots, I kept thinking about my grandfather's pots. You know, these raku wares with the Fuji, Mount Fuji, and things from China and Korea. It suddenly started gelling and making sense. Whereas my pots were appalling. They were getting better. We were using ash glazes. And then this is, again, sort of paint on sort of earthenware glaze. And I was so proud of my first teapot. So then my father, he got fired again, and he decided to call up one of his great friends from London who had a huge sheep farm, and they decided to start trading sheep with Iran. And they were going to get big container ships and put a lot of sheep in there, and they did. It took them quite a long time. So lucky me, when they decided I was to go back to England to go to art college and do pottery, they looked around and they discovered that Farnham was one of the best places to go to, which was in Surrey. So, but lucky me, I got to go to Iran en route. We stopped at Hong Kong and then flew to Dubai and then on to Iran. And that blew one's mind, these incredible turquoise domes. And there was a potter, this is Persepolis, but, and I had to quickly learn about history, but this potter was in a cave in Isfahan, and he pulled me over. I was watching and he put me on the wheel, and then I started throwing pots, and I quickly realized it was a language that I didn't need to speak to this gentleman. We both knew each other, and he gave me this bottle with a bird, which I still have and I treasure. And when I say positive and negative, I also want you to think about acid and alkali. And the thing about the Middle East, it's a Dead Sea, so all your materials are alkali. You get completely different materials in China and America and England, which are acid. So I always kept that locked in my mind. And then I got to dreary old England. It was cold. It wasn't like Australia. And, you know, I was used to wearing skirts and little dresses and things. And I was in charge of my adopted grandfather, my grandmother's third husband, who was Polish. And we would go to Kew, and I would look after him whenever I could. But Farnham was this kind of lonely place then. However, Henry Hammond was the one who really pushed me in the door and accepted me. I should have done a foundation, but he heard that I had studied all about Hamada and everybody, and he really liked my mum. So he allowed me to start right in on the ceramics course. And the other favorite teacher was Siddig Ngumi, who started us off making these oval dishes. And you'll see around, you'll see a lot of these oval dishes. But what Henry was just ruthless about, you must observe, you must observe, you must draw, and it has to be you. You have to seek your own identity. It's really important. And so Siddig was the same. He was so into his own history and style that his pots just were like they were born, they weren't even made. So this searching for identity was a sort of crisis for me. Because, you know, I was born in New York, went to Italy and Japan, and, you know, I don't know. So I started sort of appropriating, I guess, or what you call it, appropriation, of when you take somebody else's culture. And I started putting Aboriginal designs on pots, and I still really didn't know what was going on. And Dad would whisk me off, and we'd go back through Hong Kong, where I'd buy brushes for my Japanese calligraphy. And then I decided I was going to spend that time in Australia really learning about Aboriginal culture and getting to know how they ground their materials and things like that. And I decided to do my thesis when I got back to Farnham on Aboriginal art. And as soon as I got back, we were doing this Roman study for the BBC about making pots near Guildford and then getting them in the canals and taking them up home. We used all the Roman methods. And this is Philip Wood. I became friends with Philip Wood, who is now a great potter. And his best friend was Danlami Aliyu, who was from Nigeria. And we, as international students, we sort of ganged together. There was Magdalene Odindu, who was friends with Danlami, and she would come down. She's one of the great potters of England, and she's just been made Dame, Magdalene Odindu. And Danlami's was extraordinary because at the age of 16, the great Michael Cardew, who was in Abuja in Nigeria, saw this young man and saw what incredible talent he was. And his pots are up there in the top left corner. He just was incredible. So lucky me got to spend this time with Danlami, who would say, come on, Wink, you can do it. And he was so optimistic and really believed in things. And he was a feminist. He didn't care whether you were male or female. Anyway, I learned all about all his friends. And every hour of the day, I'd ask him something about Michael Cardew. I was fascinated that he had worked in Abuja. The other thing that Danlami and I shared, we both became photography supporting students. So as well as ceramics, we were doing ceramics. So we were always in the dark room and fooling around. Now there was this other fellow student who was on the fringe of things, but he was what you'd call today an influencer. And he was very cantankerous. He was this sort of extraordinary fellow, and Sean knows him well. But anyway, he was busy trying farming and also, but he believed in the hand more than anybody. And we would talk and discuss things, and he'd send me to London to go and get Japanese brushes because he would have somebody coming to give a talk or something about that. So we would be building kilns and Danlami's help, and I started going to museums and looking at other things, trying still to find my identity and just going for the things that one loves. And then out my bedroom window in the hostel, there was something going on. And what was going on is Danlami was being taught how to build a wood kiln by this remarkable man who also was from Abuja in Nigeria, and that's Michael O'Brien with the tie and the jacket. And when Michael Cardew left Abuja, Michael O'Brien, who we call Seamus, but it gets confusing, these two Michaels, but Seamus would come down from where he lived in Epsom whenever he could to help Dan Lamy, or not even help, but just discuss all that he was learning, and he became all of our teacher. And I decided to start moseying in on that by offering them cups of tea, brought them little cakes, whatever, just to hear and hang on their words. And what Michael O'Brien, the language he was talking was rocks. He knew all the materials that went into all the glazes, the whitings, the feldspars, the micas, everything about it. And so I knew exactly what he was talking about. So I sort of kept moseying in there, and we would have long discussions about form and decoration. There was an enormous fight going on, whether it was art or craft, but we would discuss about decoration fitting a form. And here's Michael O'Brien really grilling me and talking to me about pots. And then Charlie's best friend at college was Rupert Spira, and he's also one of the great potters of England. But finally Dan Lamy said to me, "Wink, I'm sick of you asking me questions about Michael. Will you please just write him a letter and ask to go down for a firing?" And little did I know, but it was just felt like natural for them, but I was terrified. And Dan Lamy sat with me as I wrote this letter, and I stuck a stamp on it, and off it went. And then I got a letter back saying, "Yes, come." And little did I know, but Henry Hammond really favoured Rupert. So he had written to Michael and said, "Can Rupert come for a firing?" So Rupert and I both caught the train down together. And Mark Hewitt, who I think gave a talk here, he's one of the great potters. He was from up north, from Stoke-on-Trent, was there. And he was just about to go off on a great journey to the Sahara. And this is Michael Cardew's son, Seth, and that's me at the age of 19. And so I went for that firing. It went very, very well. And I'll just go back. Seth said, "If you want to come and work here," it was like a way of life. There was music coming out of the doors. There was bread being cooked in the kitchen. We were all about self-sufficiency then. We weren't about sustainability. And it was like the self-sufficient hub of the universe as far as I was concerned. And I really wanted to go and work there. And Seth said, "You are a woman. You need to be very careful. If you want to come and work here, you have to sort of say you just want to come for a short time. So why don't you say you'll come just whilst Mark is off on the Sahara and just see how it goes, but you're not to bring anything, just a backpack or something like that." And but he said, "Do not ask Michael to work here. You must write him a letter and give him a chance to think about it." And so I wrote a letter, and who should come running into my room but Michael O'Brien with this postcard saying, "Yes, Wink, do come. You are a Wenford wheel." And I just thought, how wonderful. And so, but you're not to start till September. So I had to work at Cranks in Marshall Street in order to make enough money, because I knew it was room and board there, but you didn't have any cash. So I worked at Cranks, made £400, and I head down to Wenford. And as I said, it was a way of life. And there was a French boy, Thierbaut Chagui, one of the great potters of France now. You'll see his works. They look like enormous sort of, I don't want to say turds, but they're enormous sort of very rustic things, and they put them in the finest galleries in the Louvre, so you get this juxtaposition. And he makes these enormous kilns, which are on fire, and they become sculpture. And then Mark Hewitt, who was just leaving. So here I was, I found myself in this place which I'd read about in books and just couldn't believe that I was there. And this is where we sat every day. Michael always sat at the front of the table. Joanna will remember this well. I was to the right, Thierbaut was to the left. And it was like having Merlin telling us about everything from music to hunter-gatherers to the plants that were growing in the garden. And the D there was for when somebody was ill, you put the D in the window and the doctor would stop on the way. There was always a New Yorker there that he got. He was a well-traveled man, and we would discuss every mealtime. And we were surrounded by pots of all parts from the 1920s onwards when he started making pots. And he studied Greek, so the Minoan and the Mycenaean pots had a huge influence on Michael Cardew. He loved this waving line. Again, if you're spinning a pot on the wheel, all you have to do with your brush is do that, and you get this wonderful wavy line, and you see that. And I had my bedroom, again, I just had a backpack for 3 months, and we were taught to cook, and in these big jars were everything bought in bulk. We had huge bits of flour, grinding our coffee by hand. There were all sorts of rules and regulations, but it was wonderful, and I knew not to be a housewife when I was there. So in 8 o'clock in the morning, we race out into the pottery, and Tubo had worked in a factory as well as with the great Richard Batteram, and he would say, Wink, you're fussing around, they're not your grandmother's pots, get on with it, keep moving, keep moving. And so Tubo was wonderfully supportive. And Mark, this was just before Mark left, we were all beginning to make quite a lot of pots. These were my pots up the top, and Mark Hewitt was beginning to follow Sven Behr, and his pots started changing. He wanted to make his own identity out of everything that he was learning. And then there was Seth was there managing the pottery, and then Ara would show up to help fire the kilns, and he was only 17 at the time and dreamt of Elvis Presley and driving around in Cadillacs and anything to do with America. And he played jazz. The Cardews were like the Bucks. They just played music like they combed their hair. And then this is Michael's wife, Mariel, who lived in Barnes in London, and she would come down occasionally and to see her grandchildren and to be with Michael. They were very much married still. And Michael would be out chopping wood, but he would spend most of his time writing his memoirs in his office, which was in part of the courtyard. And we would be in the kiln shed dipping pots in slip, and slip is just liquid clay, it's not a glaze. And we were cooking with rocks. We had these incredible ball mills, we had corn mills. We would put granite into the kiln, into the mid-flue, so it only went to 900 degrees centigrade. We'd pull it out, hit it with a hammer, grind it up, and make glazes. Now, Michael, when he was in Africa, spent an enormous time learning geography and all those things because he didn't have these materials on hand. So he became a wizard of materials. I loved rocks, so it was just like cooking with rocks again, learning. And so I got, after about a year of being there, I felt really good. I was making pots for everyday use. I was, really getting where I wanted to be, but that identity thing kept bugging me because these were Michael's pots, Michael's materials. I fell in love with a farmer up on the Bodmin Moor, and he was incredibly good farmer. And his parents owned this cottage called Garrow Cottage on Garrow Tor. And I was fishing with him. We were hunting rabbits. We were working. They had 2,000 sheep. We were on horseback, often herding the sheep. And it was just like something out of Bronte's novel or something. And I just thought, oh my God. And so I thought maybe I should be a farmer instead of a potter, and sort of started dreaming about the future. And I was learning everything about sheep and butchering, and this was all, the lands are part of the series on television, don't worry. Anyway, I was hunting rabbits, and so I was thinking about the Aboriginal knowing the animal, and I thought, oh, if I could really just put that on the pots, like I was this medieval woman hunting rabbits, and I sort of got into the whole thing. So I'd started just putting the rabbits on the pots. I was fishing up on Delank and catching trout from Michael, which he absolutely loved, and I was struggling with my brushwork. Michael had this brush and it was so beautiful, and when I tried to use it, it was just like a clunk. And this is Michael Cardew's brushwork, these incredible long-necked birds, ibises maybe, and you know, he would flick this brush around just like that and it would all happen. And when I did it, it wasn't right. And I really didn't even know what a bird looked like. I was just sort of copying his birds. And I remember putting the knees, I did the legs the wrong way around. It was like they had knees. And he came in and burst out laughing and said, "Wink! Your birds don't have knees. The knees are way up here." So we were taught to observe. I love flowers and plants, but I'll never forget Michael sent me out to get some spinach. I hadn't a freaking clue what spinach looked like, you know. I was in terror, so I learned to observe. He'd take me out and really look at snowdrops and primroses, and he really wanted me to learn about plants as well. And there was a museum also, a little part of the enclave, and there was lots of African pots that everybody was revering and loving, but in the corner of my eye, I kept seeing this turquoise. And it's like, and these Chinese pots from Hong Kong, from Guangzhou. And it was like, that's interesting. So again, struggling for identity. And Michael Cardew went to Indiana, and there was a show on Suzhou. It's called Suzhou now. Sung Dynasty slipware pots, and he actually brought us each back a catalogue, and it was about that thick and heavy, and he brought it back and he plonked it down in front of Thiobo and I and said, "You've got to learn to make pots like this. These are just incredible." And that question of form and decoration with Michael O'Brien kept coming back, and realized there is form in the decoration here. It's not just form of the pot. So I started really analysing these pots. And this kind of brushwork, which was so like Michael's, just so clear and fluid. And you saw Bernard Leach doing this and Hamada doing it. And so Michael Cardew said, "Wink, I challenge you. You are to go and to learn how to decorate like this." So I am the experiment, because his other friend, Alan Cager Smith in Aldermaston, believed that most of the pot was its decoration. Yes, form is very important, but the decoration. So I was sent to Aldermaston, and Alan Cager Smith's boys also used to know the Moor. So I was suddenly a shoe-in. Michael had written him a letter saying, "I think Winks need to come and work with you." So I suddenly joined the team at Aldermaston Pottery, and I was suddenly being paid a wage, which was unbelievable. It was about £7.50 a week. And we were given a cottage to live in, and we were given these brushes, these incredible brushes that we learned to use at Wenford, or try to use. And these brushes were made in a family in Japan, and they were made out of horsehair and wolf hair, and they had incredible spring to them, and they could do things that most brushes couldn't. So all these parts of Alan's pots are due with these incredible horsehair brushes. And this was Alan in his 50s. He ran a team of 6 to 8 potters. He loved 8, but 6 I think was a better number. And Edgar Camden was his manager of the pottery, and he did much more figurative work. Incredible. He ended up moving to Ireland and passed away, but he taught me equally as much as Alan did. And Alan these were the patterns. It was a bit of a shock from Wenford to be suddenly using all these colours and these different shapes, and learning how to divide up pots. Anyway, so I had a little bit of a rebellion, you could say. I didn't know really, but I was learning to use a brush. And we had to do these owl pattern mugs, which you're bound to see all over the place. And we were working in the pottery, which was an old stable, and Alan would be in the back room painting. And then we would have tea breaks, which we all just dreamed of. And we'd go down to the village shop and get lardy cakes and things. And it was so cold, but Alan would always stand forth telling us these wonderful embellished stories. And like Iran, you quickly realize that he was very interested in Egypt and Spain and Italy, is that they like to embellish things. They don't want to edit things. They're into embellishment. And so Alan was really about embellishment. He wasn't about editing, but he really understood space. And then we were working with oxides now because of all the colors. And one of the things I learned from Alan, it was the lithium in the alkali glaze that gave the turquoise. Bingo, bingo, big excitement. Anyway, they also heard from Michael Cardew that I wanted to learn to draw. So I went and started drawing all the potters and working. And this is what happened to the pots. There's the rabbit, sorry, the fish, and then the bird. And if you keep watching the bird throughout this, and there's the rabbit, using the smoke clusters, which Alan cracked the code of. If you're interested in them, he's written many, many books. He was just a wizard at smoke clusters. And then my father and my mother decided to leave Australia and go back to Boston. And so I decided to raise £1,000 by being an American citizen. I could make money. And I was going to set up a pottery near Richard Batterham in Dorset. And so I just needed to get a matching grant. So I decided to go to Boston. And the only person I knew in the States was Simon Pearce, who I used to sell his glass at Cranks, or near Cranks at the Craftsman Potter Shop, and a fellow student from Farnham, Charles Shackleton. And Simon was walking by and he said, "I think I found a potter for you." And Simon turned around and he said, "Yes, I heard she worked for Michael Cardew, but she's not an American citizen." And he said, "Oh, yes, she is." So Simon Pearce studied with Harry Davis. Harry Davis studied with Bernard Leach. Harry Davis was the one who got Michael Cardew to go to Africa. So I hope you can see that it's a sea of potters all helping each other. And Simon decided to go into glass, and he started an incredible business in this old mill with his American wife, and he just sold the company for something vast amount of money. But anyway, he wanted me to start a pottery at that mill above the waterfall. So I started finally making my pots that I dreamt of making when I was at Aldermaston, and I had to train apprentices and things, and these are my bowls. And these were the designs I came up with, and Simon really had trained in Denmark, and he hated these. Just like, I hate those clouds, and I don't like these brush strokes, and can we just have a fish? So we boiled it down to this, and then they didn't sell, which was interesting. And then there are the rabbits, terrible pots, but and so we had to start thinking big for wholesale production. So we had started training a team of 6 potters to do these patterns and these designs, which were a collaboration but they were mostly my designs. And then the fish really took hold, and we started selling all around America, and it was exhausting. We were 10 potters by this stage. He'd built a factory. We started turning it out, and I'd go to Italy to see my cousin, and I was sort of interested about what would happen if you put a 3-dimensional thing on a pot. And so I started doing grapes, and people in America loved the grapes, and it just didn't feel right to me, and I started to really burn out. I was like, this is not really me, but they sold. And so I left Simon Pearce, and I said, look, keep the fish and the bird. I'm going to keep the rabbit. Just keep going. And so he sold my designs for probably another 12, 13 years. Now, Charlie and I kind of wrote ourselves into the script, you could say, together when I was working at Simon Pearce. And he encouraged me to go back to Ireland to meet his family. And this is the Shackleton's mills in Anna-Liffey, and they were known as flour millers. But Charles's father was known as one of the greatest plantsmen of Ireland, and he had this incredible perennial garden, a secret garden outside their home near Dublin. And the flowers were just amazing, and I decided I really wanted to learn about gardening. Well, we got married, and here's Charlie helping me over the barbed wire in Somerset, in Dinder, where we got married. at my cousin's. And so I did a bowl for our marriage, and I think him helping me over the barbed wire is pretty much how it's been for us ever since. And then Charlie decided, I said, what are you doing blowing glass? You know, you always were in the furniture department at college. So he decided to move into the basement and start making furniture. And he loved Edward Barnsley. He wanted to get the hand into his furniture, and he was very, very serious about it. And I wanted to go out on my own, really wanted to, but Charlie had gone out on his own. So I would go into Simon Pearce and work part-time until I exploded. And I remember I had no money. I spent it on our wedding, that we went, and I bought this little electric kiln in the basement, and I started making low-fired earthenware again. And I started exploring patterns and animals, and I went to Aesop's fables, and here's the crow, and the fox to asking the crow to drop his cheese, and then doing this Italian design where you put in your main animal, and you go outside, and you put something in the middle of that space, and then you go into the middle of that space, so you go deeper and deeper into space. And this is what the basement looked like, was me with all my pots, and then we had 2 children, and Charlie was sort of planing furniture, and it was just chaos. And I finally said, you know, Charlie, if you chop your fingers off, I just don't want to be there. I can't handle it. So he decided to move out. And this old mill was for sale, and a portion of it was for sale down the road. So he decided to take out a vast loan and buy this building. And this building, 10 years, not 10 years, I can't even remember, about 6 years later, came up for sale. And so we decided to buy this building and start 2 apartments so the pottery could be out of the basement. And I began researching the scroll pattern, like I explained to you a little bit before about it moving and then reflecting backwards. And I wanted to incorporate it into my work. And it took an enormous amount of research, and I started then. And here's me trying to figure it out, what's going on. And meanwhile, all the all the friends at Simon Pearce knew I wanted a gas kiln. I could afford the kiln, but I couldn't afford the shed. So they said, you get the kiln, we'll build the shed. And they all came and they built me a shed. And I was finally free as a bird. I could make reduced stoneware where you smoke the pots. And I didn't have to rely on this low-fired electric kiln. And there I was in my shed, heaven. The children didn't like it. They said I turned into a beast when I was in there. But there was I was working out the scroll and how it fit the form. And I was really into gardening. I started peonies and throwing on a kick wheel. I was very happy. And I was carving through black slip again. I felt like I'd come home. It was wonderful. And this is Michael Cargew's way of dividing up a shape and creating a sort of TV image. And then Charles and I decided to buy a house high on a hill, a very old house, and it's handmade. And we just love it there. And then we decided to start a garden, and mostly alpines and things in the spring, and then a lot of autumn color in the fall. And then this is the aerial view of the mill. You can see it's a small village, and then there's vast wilderness and trees all around us. So we decided to create 2 workshops, furniture and pottery, to train and to work with people. We knew we couldn't do it by ourselves, make a living. We needed help. So we started training up. Charlie trained up 29 furniture makers, selling all through Simon Pearce. So Simon Pearce would buy it from him and then put a markup and sell it. And we were doing so well until we got financial advice, and they said, you're really putting $200 bills on every piece of furniture that goes out. You're not making any money. So we had to really start thinking about things differently. And here we are. And then, so I got R. Cardew, who wanted to come to America, and he helped me get the pottery going. You can see the furniture production really started. And by then I had this incredible team of potters. My cousin's wife, he immigrated to America. Then there's Evan Williams, who's still with me, is the tall fellow, and he makes all my big pots, or our big pots. and Ara Cardew, and then that fellow now is Jeff Wilson. He made all the slabs. And these potters now are very well known in America. There's Autumn Sapala and Molly Hatch, who has become this sort of incredible commercial thing. Veronica DeLay is a potter, and Fiona Davis now teaches at an arts program. Anyway, this was our team, and these were the pots that we really started making and feeling really good about. And we started selling direct. We weren't selling through stores anymore. We would occasionally have a gallery show, but you know, curators from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts would come and buy these pots. People would take them for their homes. And then this is the fish. Hold on, how do I do this? There we go. Just to give you an idea of how the fish come about. And you're taught to just use the very tip of a brush. You're not using, you scratch through. And this is something we learned from the Sioux Chow potters. Their pots were on top of the glaze. It wasn't underglaze, it was on top. And then you can scratch through, you can do all sorts of things. How can I get out of here? Okay, so then the rabbit really found its home in the scroll, and the tree of life. I had to draw trees, we were surrounded by them. And the tree of life is an old Zoroastrian pattern from Persia. And what it is you've got your main trunk, and every branch splits and divides, and then it splits and divides again. It's quite mathematical. And if you break the line, you don't draw a solid line, you can then break through. And all this is done freehand. There's no working out a pattern first. You just do it like a dance. And that's how we train other people to do it like a dance. So this also shows the bird. And the bird morphed into a peace dove. So you can see it's all freehand. It's not mapped out at all. Now, because I wanted to be a diplomat long ago, I saw these pots as sort of envoys. Pots are envoys. They're taking things a moment in time and passing it down through time. And I've always been interested in messages that these pots can carry. And it was 1999, and I learned that America on the radio was the longest it's been at peace ever. It was like 8 years. And so the millennium was hovering. And so I decided to take one of these pots and write a letter to President Clinton and say, it's up to you to carry the peace and accept this humble dish, you know, with the peace dove or whatever. And it's up to you to bring peace into the millennium. And it's by American hands, American soil, whatever. Anyway, he accepted it into his office. I couldn't believe it. And I got a little note saying, oh, thank you for your kind words, whatever. But I had the address of the chief of protocol who to send it to from a customer. And we sent this card for an invitation to one of our big parties that we held at the mill on Christmases. And I got a phone call during the party saying, now this is the chief of protocol from the White House, and we thought it was a joke. We'd like 16 of those, please. And I said, well, actually, we've sold that and there aren't any. And they said, we don't care. We just need symbolism. Just grab 16 pieces. So my sister, who was our business manager, we ran around and we grabbed 16 pieces. And it all went off to the Far East, to all the places they went. And then 6 weeks later, we got a phone call, again from the White House, saying, Miranda, we need, one of those pieces was porcelain and it had a peony on it, but we need a peace dove. And can you do this by February the 6th? And it was 2 weeks before Christmas. And I said, no, I can't. It's too short a time. And they said, I don't think you understand. You have to. And so I went up to Charles and I said, this is going to screw up our whole holiday and everything with 2 small children. And he said, Wink, I think you have to. So I went, oh. And then I said, well, I guess we're going to have to. And they said, well, that's good because it's President Clinton's private, personal gift to Pope John Paul II. So years later, we found out what happened, and they set up an airport hangar, and they had the Pope come in. They had a little toilet at the back, and then there was a security guard or whatever, and he presented him with the bowl. And I called and said, oh, I'd love to do a press thing about it. And they said, no, you don't do that. You don't do that. You do it. Well, anyway, the president of Dartmouth College, 9/11, lost 11 of his students in the terrible disaster, and they needed a plaque. So he came to me and asked me if I could design one in brass. So I had to learn how to go about doing that, and I used one of Charlie's furniture things from the mirrors to do the outside. Then the UN heard about the pot for that was doing for the White House. And they needed a gift to give Secretary General Kofi Annan after 10 years of service. So I got a phone call from them, and do you know how scary this is? This is really scary. I mean, so scary. And putting gold on is really frightening. It's like this black, sticky, horrible stuff, and you can't wipe it off. If you do, it goes pink. It's just really scary. And I knew that they asked for a touch of gold and with the peace stuff, so I came up with this bowl, and here they are presenting it to Kofi Annan. And after Kofi, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon won a prize, so they wanted to honor him with this prize. And so I decided to do swirling fish. It was all about water. And I was asked to present it to him. And then my grandfather's buildings were celebrating their 100th, and I was commissioned to do a bowl for the Ritz and a bowl for the RAC Club. And there's my mum being there for the presentation of these bowls. And then for 16 years, I've been doing humanitarian award gifts for every gala that the United Nations Association does. And we have to think about it really carefully. It was always in October when the United Nations Day was happening. But one year they were honoring Norman Foster, and they called me in a flat because all he would accept was something white. It has to be white. So I had to design a vase, and here he is. And he heard about my grandfather, and he was just so delighted. He goes, he was epic. And then the UN, there was a thing in London called the Lumba Trust with Lord Lumba, and he wanted to create UN International Widows' Day on the calendar, because if you get it on the UN calendar, then you can get all sorts of charity money to start flowing through to the widows in Africa and India, all these collateral damage of war. And so Yoko Ono got right behind this. So we had to design pieces that would go and we could sell to raise money to start the UN International Widows' Day. And we did it. It's now June 23rd. And if you mark your calendars, and then the slide's gone funny, but anyway, I suddenly got a call from President Obama's office that they needed to give something for the Vad Hashem Museum in Israel. So they chose a blue and gold bowl. And then President Biden was offered a peace bowl when he was vice president. And then suddenly I had pots in the vault, and Nancy Pelosi, this was 2 years ago, chose one of my pots to present to Pope Francis. And then President Biden, this was 2 weeks before my daughter's wedding, I got a phone call that they needed 80 bowls for all the heads of NATO. And again, you know, of course, you know, peace doves, I'll be able to do that. And they said, no, not peace doves. We can't do peace doves. We are peacekeepers, but we aren't necessarily about peace. So you need to come up with a different design. So I came up with a sort of victory, and then the 7 became like a dagger. And each one of these things was put in this fancy box and was given to all the heads of NATO. And then just recently, I had to come up with a commission for the kings of Bhutan. There are 2 kings. There's the old king and the new king. The new king is more minimalist. The old king, turquoise, is the emperor's or the imperial color. And this is the snow lion, who is the guardian of the glaciers and all the mountains in Bhutan, and they teach their children they have to believe in the cloud dragon and the snow lion, because if these things on the planet collapse, they will be no longer there. They are the protectors. So here I am with the Bhutanese dragon. And then my daughter's boss, Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, he started working with indigenous peoples, and they started bringing the buffalo back to Montana. So he wanted to give the great chief a bowl in gratitude for what he's doing. And then with travels, going to Jingdezhen, you'll see the dragon comes alive, having been taught how to draw dragons. And then, big surprise, a friend called from the Smithsonian, and they asked me to go to Davos, to the World Economic Forum in the with Turquoise Mountain, which is now King Charles's, one of his favorite charities with Rory Stewart. But they went, and this place was completely trashed in the Afghanistan war, and they built up all the village from all the makers up, from the bakers, the makers, and so there. And then I started shifting a focus with climate change away from humanities towards the environment. When I went down to Antarctica, it blew my mind. And so being a Shackleton, if we could get people to go on the ship, then we could go free. And I got 20 people to go on the ship. So I started drawing penguins and whales on the pots, and it's all very silly. However, they sell, and they raise money for the Southern Oceans Coalition, which is against microplastics and krill, the overfishing of krill. So this was one of the posters I did for fighting microplastics. And then I started raising money for the overfishing of krill. And the whole Treaty of Antarctica is coming up in 2040. And if we don't do something about it, we're talking about a whole continent. It's not just a little country somewhere. And everybody wants the commodities of that place. And it's going to be pillaged, and especially with robotics. They can go where people can't go. So for me, the focus now is Antarctica. And then I've come up with some new glazes. And of course, the lithium blue is here. It's on your little birds. And we've had lots of setbacks, these things that stop you from going forward. We've had 2 floods, a pandemic, and a fire, which have always been impossible, but that's when it really is helpful being married to a Shackleton. They carry on, they keep moving. And here's the gentleman that helped us. They came all the way up from Texas. And so I gave them each a blue bird, thanking them. And here we are, we're still training, passing on all the hand skills to young things. This is my team now, and it's funny calling them a team because they're all potters. And Jess has been with me for 25 years. Evan has been with me. Eric is sailing on his own now. He's an incredible potter. Meg is doing a lot of the throwing at the moment. And then there's myself and Christy, who is the manager of the pottery and a most incredible potter as well, and decorates as well as throws. And then we still encourage them to have their own identity. They're allowed to make pots in their own time and really try to seek out who they are. And we had a show where they were allowed to make their own pots. And we're connecting to the people, making in the environment with Charlie's Naked Table Project, where people come and make their own tables, and then they eat. We put all the tables end to end. We challenge a locavore chef to make a totally local meal, and then they share with all the makers at the table. The community comes out. And new designs, I'm putting gold now on the rough surface so it's not so shiny. And then with people passing, when you turn 60, there's a lot of loss. And so I wanted to come up with this new design. Everybody's kitchens are white now. So my old zircon glaze was too gray, so they wanted a white glaze. So we've come up with this new forget-me-not pattern, again, boiling it down to the essence of not forgetting somebody, using it. And now we're in the business we're 30 years in business of making urns. And this is one of the greatest honors, is to make somebody an urn, to hold their loved one or their life. And then revisiting old friends is probably one of the most important things. And here's Richard, who we got to know through Thierbaud. And he was just such a dear friend with Dinah, his wife, who taught me so much about flowers and raising little narcissus from seed. And going back to Michael O'Brien, who's still in Epsom, he's just one of the kindest, most noble people I know. And we're still talking about cooking with rocks and the holy grail of the chun glazes. And our friend Joanna Bird as well, and Philip Wood. We're all still a family, really. And here's our son, Hugh, who's now a furniture maker, extraordinary talented fellow. And our daughter, Sophia, who's expecting a child now any minute. And Yo-Yo Ma. And just on Saturday, they had all the native, I shouldn't really say, the indigenous people of the Wabanuk tribe join us on the Connecticut River to see the sun up. We all had to turn up at 4:30. And this woman's job is to see the sun up every day. And finally, I've reached my style. It's taken me a long time. It's going a bit quick.
What are you drawing with?
I'm drawing with a little bamboo stick, tiny little quill, and it's beefed up with Band-Aids and a bit of foam. And I'm carving. I usually draw with a porcupine quill from Africa. It's got a nice U-shaped end, so the glaze can flow in and out of the drawing. So there are positives and our negatives. And what I'd like to end with, the slides, is this is a poem written by Kathleen Lee. Kathleen Lee was one of the women that believed in female intellect. She started women going to Oxford. And when there was C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, they didn't really believe in female intellect. Kathleen Lee really was the one who really charged ahead for women at the Lady Margaret Hall, where also Michael Cardew's wife went. And she met Bernard Leach, and this is the poem that she wrote. And it said, "The pot, fire me, burn me into coherence, risk me into wholeness, that my particles fall not apart, glaze me next into beauty, incandescent in a second death, and at last, use me. Oh, shaper, destroyer, and perfecter, use me, I pray." And I'm going to leave you with that. So, anyway. Is that very long? Anyway, thank you. Thank you for indulging me. I really appreciate it. So I've got a little thing, a tiny gift that I want to give you, and it's a bluebird. And just take them out and worry with them, do whatever you like, but they're all going to go off with you. And then I put a sheet of paper on each of your things with a pencil or a pen if you need it. And I was going to teach you how to do the scroll. And once you see the scroll, you're going to hate me. You're going to see it everywhere. And it's something that really vaulted the whole decorative arts movement forward in the sense that you could cover space very quickly and everything. And it didn't exist before 560 BC. And if anybody can find it before 560 BC, I want you to call me and tell me, because I'm trying to find the origins. And the origins come from Iraq and across, but they were just I'll show you, hold on. So on your sheet of paper, I'm going to take a drink of water. Are we running out of time? Pretty long. Is it 8? Okay, we're going to shift along really quick. Now, with very light things between your lines, you decide how big you want them to be. I want you to very lightly put little circles. Just join them up like that. I think you can all draw a circle. Oh, of course, come on. Sean, I'll flick water at you if you're not careful. Now here is point A. And we're going all the way around the pot to point A again. Now the best way I can show you this is I'm going to now we couldn't find a pot, so I said to Joanna to find a flower pot or something. So we've got a flower pot. Okay. So you remember what I said about point A? So we're going to put this point here and we're going to make that A. And then we're going to go whizzing round, all the way round, and we're going to come back to point A again. So I'm going to do this as quickly as I can so you all can eat. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to whiz around. Are you ready? Whee! This is how potters think. And then, as Michael saw in those Mycenaean pots, if you wiggle your brush, and then you come back to A. Oops, ran out. So what I'm going to do I sort of mentally think about these circles, and I'm going to start at A. I'm just drawing the circle as best I can. And I'm going to go in 2 different directions. Just like that. Now, what you'll find, if you try to do this, your brain can't do it. It's called a learned pattern, because in pattern making, we all know how to do stripes, we know how to do triangles and squares and circles, but see how long it's taking me to get to A. You can do cross hatchings, you can do all sorts of fun things, spirals. So it's taken me quite a long time to get to A. Now with the scroll, I'm following these circles and I'm going around. Look how quick it is. And I'm able to create these spaces here. So in order to do this, I want you to follow me on your circles. You ready? So here I'm going to do my light circles. Hold on. And I'm teaching you so you can track this pattern through the trade routes and where they traded craftsmen and things. You can see when it arrives with the Spaniards in Latin America and things like that. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to start here about 9 o'clock. And you're going to go and you're going to start drawing this circle, but remember we're going forward to point A. So you're going to go and you're going to start drawing a circle and uh-oh, you're going the wrong way, right? So you need to reverse your car. You don't turn your car around and go back here where you went the wrong way. You need to reverse it and go forward again and start drawing your circle and go around. Does that make sense? Yes. And and Wedgwood made this mistake when he was trying to learn this pattern. If you go round and you turn your car around and you actually go this way, and then it ends up as a linked pattern. It doesn't end up as the scroll. And your brain wants to do that. It wants to turn around your device. But you have to reverse to that split in the road where you're going, you want to go forward again. So we're going around, and then we're reversing and going back to that split in the road where we can go forward again. And then we're going to reverse and go forward. Reverse and go forward again. How are you doing? It's hard. It's not easy to do this freehand. And it's something for you guys to practice, but you have to remember you're reversing your car. You're not turning yourself around in order to go down. You're having to go back to the place that you went the wrong direction. Now, little tricks about this.
Miranda, you finished with the pots?
Yes. Sorry. If anybody need help, are you okay? Got it? So the other secret is if you break the line as you go around, which I did at the beginning of the talk, you suddenly can shoot through the line. Do you see that, how it works? And you go backwards as you fill in the spaces, and this is your road. So all you need to do is be parallel with your road. You might put a leaf in and just travel along the road and do a little thing, and then come back, and on this side we'll do a little thing that way, and then you come back and then you fill in all these kind of areas, and you end up with your positives and your negatives. And if you are leaving, you'll look down on Joanna's carpet and you'll see the scroll, and you'll often see it in just everywhere, like in frames, in all things. And William Morris really loved the scroll. He used the scroll a lot. It's a Persian. It started off as this, and you see this throughout the Middle East. It's called a palmet. Then the palmet became this, but it didn't move. It just stayed stagnant. And it was around 560, in an incredible potter in Greece called Exquisite. He started taking this, and you'll see it at the British Museum in the galleries downstairs. Suddenly this starts going, and then this goes. And you see it all beginning to move from that moment. So I'm going to give you that date again, 560 BC. And I want to know if you can find it before then. You find things that almost happened in 17th century Crete, and it's pregnant, it's almost there, and then there must have been some incredible disaster to wipe it out for 1,000 years, and that would lead up to the earthquake or something else that happened. Now, one more thing, another little fun thing, and this is whilst you're doodling, is if you do a spiral, you go in, if you turn your spiral around, you come back out again, right? And you've got your suddenly, so everything you see that's a spiral has got two sides to it, but this is what happens with the scroll. Oh, I'll start here. If you start your scroll by using this as your inside line, and you travel, just do a little loop or a lobe, you get something that looks like a closed up fern, or you can make it closer. You get these incredible patterns. Now, the Byzantiums and things, they did things like this, you know, they did that going around. And then the Pompeians, they loved to spin off and do these wonderful patterns like this. To give you an idea of the scroll and how it was used. One last thing is that if you take it and you just turn inwards, you get that wonderful fern-like pattern. But if you turn the other way, you go outwards and do the same thing, you end up with something completely different. And then you suddenly have all this space in here. So that's what I'm leaving you with. It's a little tiny gift. You'll probably hate me forever if you realize it, but it's a fun thing to do when you're sitting there and scrolling too much on your phone to try to do the scroll. But it is a learned pattern. It's not something that the human being can just do in all cultures, and you can really trace it and follow it. But thank you for indulging me. I mean, what a treat. What an incredible treat. And thank you, Joanna. Thank you for having us. And anyway, I hope you enjoy yourselves. I'll sleep better tonight. And these, do you have any questions? Or Joanna, do you want to ask any? I know, and I didn't want it to be all about me, and I apologize. You know, it's very hard to give a talk and not talk about yourself, so I wanted it to be a journey.
Have you written a book?
No, No, I've been too busy. I think I'd love to have help. I'm a potter, I'm not a writer. I can, talk a little bit, but it needs people to help me if I am, because I just feel I'm so lucky with the teachers I had and the insight, and it's like a filing cabinet. If you pull out your memories, it's amazing what comes out, but if you try to sort of figure it out when you're writing, I just can't do it. I try.
Fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Anyway, I love it. I'm still completely passionate about pots. I will talk about pots till the cows come home. And I still love gardening. I love flowers and plants. And I live very close to nature, and I prefer that. Anyway, any other questions? Do you understand about lithium in a glaze and alkalis and acids? Just to give you one little tip, if it's a green glaze, a bottle green glaze, it's copper in an acid. As soon as that copper goes into an alkali, it goes turquoise. The other thing is Michael Cardew let the cat out of the bag about these blues, which are totally, they're a miracle, they're a mirage. They are not blue, they are not pigmented with cobalt at all. The secret is there are little bubbles of glass within the glass, and they're refracting the light blue to the blue spectrum. So the more bubbles you have, the more iron that's coming up from the surface. You get the thicker chun glazes, you get these incredible blues. In America, they don't like the blue, they want it black. So you'll see in my pots that I bring over, they're mostly black with this brown edge, and they're reduction fired, they're smoked. And so the iron converts from FeO3, which is a rust, back to FeO2, and it becomes a metal again. So it's alchemy. It's all alchemy. And I just love cooking with rocks. Okay, that's it, I think.
Well, I just want to say one last big thank you from all of us. It's been so inspiring.
Oh,
You've
thank
given us
you.
so much to think about. Worldwide matters of great importance. And I think we'll all go away with a lot of thoughts and things that we might act upon. And Miranda has dedicated all her pots that are next door to the foundation. So if any of you wish to buy one from there, you will be contributing more to our efforts to make interesting films and find out more about interesting lives. And yours is exceptional.
And we're hoping to get a film about Michael O'Brien, who's now 93, lives in Epsom. And 95. Oh my goodness, that's just, yeah. And he has always hid his light under a bush. And we need to bring him out and show the world what an incredible potter and man he was. He worked a lot in Africa, and we're trying to get him an OBE, all sorts of things like that. So
this is any gifts from Miranda will be going towards.
And the pots with the penguins have just come out of the kiln with the lithium glaze on the inside. It's totally non-toxic and wonderful, and this lovely silky dolomite glaze on the outside with penguins. And the dolomite glaze really likes iron, so when you paint iron on it, gets anyway. So very pleased with those mugs. Thank you.